The document I'm looking at right now is a federal court transcript from 2022, and buried inside it, not as the headline, not as the reason the case went to trial, there's a single paragraph that names a suspect in a murder that went cold in 1995. 27 years. That's how long it took for anyone to say a name out loud in a courtroom. The murder was Randy Stretch Walker, Queens rapper, producer, a man who had been Tupac Shakur's closest creative collaborator in the early 90s. And the reason this paragraph exists at all is because prosecutors were talking about a different murder entirely. Stretch came up as a footnote, a side detail, a name dropped between larger arguments in a trial that wasn't about him. That's what kept pulling me back. Not just the killing, the way the system filed it, the way a man's death got folded into someone else's paperwork and left there for nearly 3 decades. I want to tell you about the night of November 30th, 1995. I want to tell you what the record actually says versus what the streets assumed. Because those two things diverged a long time ago, and almost nobody went back to check the gap. This case has a pattern to it. Once you see the shape, you don't stop seeing it. Here's what I was able to reconstruct from public records, court documents, and contemporaneous reporting. Randy Walker is born August 21st, 1968 in Springfield Gardens, Queens. He's a tall kid. The nickname Stretch isn't metaphorical. He comes up in the local rap scene alongside his brother Christopher, who goes by Majesty, and DJ K-Lo. Together they form Live Squad, Underground, Queens, Hard-Edged. By the early 90s, Stretch has connected with Tupac Shakur, and that connection becomes one of the more significant creative partnerships in that era of hip-hop. According to available records, they collaborate on material connected to the Thug Life Collective during the early 1990s. Then comes November 30th, 1994. Reports suggest that Tupac Shakur was shot in a Manhattan recording facility during this period. He survives. Stretch is present during this incident. He doesn't get hit. And in the aftermath, in the version Tupac tells publicly, in interviews, in music, he starts pointing fingers at the people who were present and walked away unharmed. Stretch is on that list. I want to be careful here. Tupac's suspicion was public. It was real. But suspicion is not evidence, and I've read nothing that conclusively establishes Stretch had any role in setting up that shooting. What I can tell you is this: whatever that friendship had been, it fractured after that night. Publicly, permanently, exactly 1 year later. And I mean exactly. November 30th, 1995, just after midnight. Stretch has just dropped his brother Christopher off at home. He's behind the wheel of his green minivan, heading through Queens. A dark-colored vehicle pulls alongside him. 2, possibly 3 men inside. They open fire. At least 4 shots. At least 2 hit him in the back. Stretch crashes and does not survive. He was 27 years old. The case goes cold almost immediately. For the next 27 years, no charges surface, no named suspects emerge, no public movement. Until that footnote in a 2022 federal transcript changes everything. The first wall I hit was the simplest one. Almost no contemporaneous investigative reporting covers this case. I went looking for police statements from 1995, press conferences, detective quotes, the kind of procedural paper trail that follows a homicide investigation in a public case. Almost nothing exists. What coverage does run treats the murder primarily as a music industry story, as a chapter in the Tupac narrative, rather than as a criminal investigation into a man's death. That absence tells me something. Either investigators moved with exceptional quiet by design, or they didn't prioritize it. What I could find was the neighborhood, Queens Village. I pulled up maps, old photos, accounts of the area in the mid-90s. It's residential, low traffic at that hour. The crash would have echoed through the dark. Someone heard it. Someone saw something. Whether those people talked to investigators is a different question, and one I can't answer from public records. Now, here's the detail that I can't shake. The date. November the 30th, 1994. Tupac is shot in Manhattan. November 30th, 1995, Stretch is shot in Queens. Exactly 1 year to the calendar date. I've thought about how to frame this carefully because the easy read is conspiratorial and I'm not interested in easy. But the pattern is factual. It's documented. And when I stare at that timeline, I'm not asking whether someone planned a symbolic anniversary killing. I genuinely don't know. What I'm asking is simpler. Did Stretch know the date when he got behind the wheel that night? Because if the people who killed him chose that night deliberately, and I'm not claiming they did, I'm asking whether it's possible, then this was not random violence. This was a message written in the calendar. And if it wasn't deliberate, if it was coincidence, then what that says about the geometry of violence in that world during those years is almost harder to absorb. I want to stay with the evidence now, because this is where things get complicated in a specific way. For nearly 3 decades, no suspect was publicly named. Then, in July 2022, a federal court transcript becomes public. A transcript from a case about an entirely different murder. And buried inside it, Stretch's name surfaces for the first time in decades. The trial itself doesn't happen until later. In January 2024, federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of New York tried 2 men, Carl Jordan Jr. and Ronald Tinnard Washington, for the 2002 murder of Jason Mizell. Jam Master Jay. That's the headline. The jury convicts both men the following month. But it's what was in those earlier filings that matters here. In the course of laying out their case, prosecutors allege that Ronald Tinnard Washington killed Randy Stretch Walker in 1995. Let me be precise about what that means legally. As of now, documents indicate that no formal charges have been filed against Washington specifically for Stretch's murder. The allegations surfaced as part of the government's broader argument in a separate trial. An assertion from prosecutors, not a conviction, not even an indictment on this count. But the allegation contains a detail that reframes the entire night of November 30th, 1995. According to prosecutors, Stretch was not the intended target. Christopher Walker was, Stretch's brother, the man Stretch had just dropped off at home, the man who stepped out of that vehicle minutes before the shooting started. Think about what that means for a moment. Stretch isn't killed because of his history with Tupac. He isn't killed because of that earlier incident or suspicion, or a debt the streets decided needed paying. He dies because he's in a car that someone wanted his brother to be in, and his brother isn't there anymore. He drives away from his brother's house. He turns onto the street, and he dies in a case of mistaken identity, or mistaken location, while his brother is inside, alive, unreachable. That's the version prosecutors put forward. I can't verify it independently. What I can do is note that it came from federal prosecutors, not from rumor, not from unnamed sources. It came from court filings in a related federal case, and it still hasn't resulted in charges for Stretch's murder. I want to sit with that for a second. I went looking for any follow-up, any reporting on whether Washington faced or would face separate prosecution for what happened to Stretch. The Jam Master Jay trial took years to conclude. The Stretch Walker murder, mentioned inside that trial, seems to have generated almost no independent legal momentum of its own. According to available records, I cannot find evidence of formal charges filed specifically for this homicide. The current investigative status remains unclear. It exists in legal limbo, named but unprosecuted, alleged but unresolved. There's a more recent development, and I think it matters to how much weight I put on any of this. In December 2025, a federal judge threw out Carl Jordan Jr.'s conviction, ruled that prosecutors never actually proved a motive for him. A judge approved his release on $1 million bond in April, but prosecutors appealed, and as of this recording, he remains in custody while that appeal plays out. Ronald Washington's conviction was not thrown out. The same judge, in the same ruling, let it stand. I want to be careful about what that does and doesn't mean. A judge upholding one man's conviction for the Jam Master Jay murder is not a verdict on Stretch Walker's murder. Nobody has been charged in this case, but the man prosecutors say pulled the trigger on Stretch. His conviction in the case that put his name in that 2022 filing in the first place just survived a judge actively looking for reasons to overturn it. That's not proof. It's the closest thing to a credibility check this theory has gotten. I thought I understood the rough shape of this case going in. A hip-hop murder in 1995, cold for decades, famous for the Tupac connection, reopened quietly through unrelated litigation. That shape made sense to me. It was tragic, but it was coherent. Then I went back to the timeline, specifically to the night itself, and I started working the sequence of events from the inside out. Stretch drops Christopher off. Christopher goes inside. Stretch drives away. The shooting starts shortly after. If the target was Christopher, then whoever fired those shots was watching. They were close enough to see who got out of the vehicle, close enough to track which way it went, and they moved fast enough to intercept it within minutes of the drop-off. That's not a chance encounter. That's surveillance. Someone knew where Christopher Walker was going to be that night, which means, and I want to be very careful about how I say this, because I'm working from a prosecutorial allegation, not established court findings, which means the people who fired on that vehicle had information, specific, recent information, about the movements of one particular man. Whether that information came through observation or from someone closer to the situation, I cannot tell you. The record doesn't go there, but the logistics of the shooting, as I understand them from available accounts, don't look like random street violence. They look like a plan that executed imprecisely. And the question I can't shake, the one I've been carrying since I first read that court transcript, is this. Does Christopher Walker know who wanted him dead that night? Does he know why his brother died instead of him? I don't have an answer, and the public record doesn't provide one. I've gone back through everything I pulled on this case more times than I can count. Here's where the evidence actually puts me. The Tupac connection is real. Stretch and Tupac had a genuine creative partnership. The 1994 incident genuinely fractured it, and the anniversary date of the killing genuinely invites the read that Stretch died because of that fracture, because someone in that world decided the date meant something. That read is emotionally coherent. It has narrative logic, but the prosecutorial allegation from 2022 cuts directly across it. If prosecutors are right, and I flag this explicitly, because this is an allegation from a related trial, not a proven fact in its own right, then Stretch's death has nothing to do with Tupac or the politics of that particular rivalry. It has to do with a dispute involving his brother Christopher. Stretch is collateral. He's the wrong person in the right vehicle at the wrong minute. I can't prove which version is correct, but I can tell you which version the evidence currently points toward, Because the one thing prosecutors had in 2022 that the streets didn't have in 1995 is a specific name and a specific motive. And neither of those things involves Tupac Shakur. What I find harder to account for is the date. If this killing was about Christopher Walker and not about Stretch, if the Tupac connection is genuinely coincidental to the motive, then November 30th is either the most remarkable coincidence in this entire story, or it points towards something I don't have enough evidence to articulate cleanly. The dates exist. I can't explain them away. I'm also not prepared to build a theory on them without harder evidence. What I can say is this. The anniversary has functioned for 30 years as a kind of gravitational field around this case. It pulls every interpretation toward the Tupac narrative. And that pull may have obscured the simpler, colder possibility that Stretch Walker died not as a symbol, not as a message, but as a mistake. There's also what the system did here, and I don't want to pass over it too quickly. A man was murdered in 1995. A suspect's name didn't surface publicly until 2022, and only then as a sidebar in a different trial. That's 27 years of a case sitting. 27 years of a family, his brother Christopher, whoever else was close to him, living with that open question. No official charges have been filed specifically for Stretch's murder. The investigation, if it's still active, is not visible to the public record. What that tells me is not necessarily that investigators don't know what happened. It may tell me that what they know isn't yet prosecutable on its own, separate from the Jam Master Jay case. But from the outside, the effect is the same. The case is open and quiet. I keep coming back to that vehicle, the specific, ordinary detail of it. Not a getaway car, not a vehicle moving towards something dangerous. A man giving his brother a ride home at midnight, then turning back out into the street alone. It's such a small sequence of events. Drop someone off, drive away, die. The federal transcript I started with, the one that named Ronald Washington, that floated the theory about Christopher being the intended target. It's sitting in front of me again right now. And what strikes me, reading it again with everything else I've gathered, is how little weight the system gave to Stretch in that document. He's referenced, he's named, his death is characterized, and then the trial moves on to other things. There's something in that I find genuinely difficult. Not outrageous in a theatrical sense, just difficult. A man's life, his whole history, the music he made, the friendship he held and then lost, the night he died, compressed into a paragraph inside someone else's case file. Randy Walker was 27 years old on November 30th, 1995. He'd turned 27 3 months earlier, in August. His brother walked inside. Stretch drove away. I don't know whether the date meant something to whoever pulled the trigger. I don't know whether that trigger was pulled by the man prosecutors named, or whether that man will ever face a charge specifically for what happened that night. What I know is that the case is still open, that the name of a possible suspect exists in a court record and nowhere in a criminal indictment, that a family has been waiting since 1995 for something the system has not yet delivered. The question I'll carry out of this one isn't about Tupac, or the date, or who pulled the trigger. It's the simpler question, the one that doesn't have a legal answer. Did Christopher know? Does he know now? And what does a man do with 30 years of that?